Hi, welcome back. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to start looking at the secularisation topic. So this is topic 3 in Year 2 Christianity, Christianity and the Challenge of Secularisation. Little shout out to Daisy who requested this one. It's a big topic, so I'm not going to try and take the whole of the topic in this video. I'm going to break it down. So this video will take you about halfway through the topic, and then there'll be another video coming soon that will tackle the second half. So here we go. Secularisation is essentially just the process of becoming less religious, or the process of religion moving away from being influential. Don't panic if that doesn't make sense, because I've got lots and lots of examples. The word secular, from which we get secularisation, means unconcerned with religious or spiritual matters. So to put it really simply, secular just means not religious. So there's quite a few ways in which UK society is becoming more secular. Now, for the purposes of the exam, you only need to be able to talk about UK society. There's quite interesting things happening all over the world with religion and secularisation and what's happening, but you only need to know about the UK. So the number of people attending acts of worship or saying they belong to a religion, that number is falling. And the number of people who identify as atheist or say they have no religion and reject supernatural truth claims, that's going up. The way we know that is from census data. And we've just had a big drop of data from the 2021 census. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story, but it does show certain numbers going up and down in a way that's quite compelling. The church doesn't have the kind of influence it used to have in healthcare and education. So there are still some faith schools, but not every school is a faith school. And the church does much, much, much less than it used to on things like healthcare. Politics and the law, changes and decisions used to be made with a big focus on Christian beliefs, Christian morality. Now not so much. And this is probably the biggest one of all. People have freedom of religion. And true freedom of religion includes the freedom to reject religion. Now, you might take that for granted, but we definitely didn't always have that. And once we did have it, secularisation was probably inevitable. So like I say, this is a fairly recent development. Society becoming much more secular and having freedom of religion. So until the end of the 18th century, Christianity was a lot more powerful in every area of British life than it is now. So to give you some examples, expressing atheist views openly wasn't really the done thing. And if you did, you would often face hostility. So Hume experienced that. And you would just be mocked. You wouldn't be taken seriously because the church had so much power. Hospitals and schools, almost all run by the church. Laws were made with a big focus on Christian values and principles. And at this time, Britain was monocultural. There was a Jewish community. There would have been pockets of other beliefs here and there, but nothing like what we have today. Other religions and worldviews were not widely represented in the way that they are today. Now, here's an interesting question for us to start thinking about in terms of secularisation. Secularisation is happening. We know it is. Society is becoming less religious, more secular. We could interpret that one of two ways. We could say Christianity succeeded or it's failed. So on the one hand, secularisation could just show us that Christianity has kind of completed itself. So it's blended so seamlessly with modern life that there's no reason to kind of see Britain as a quote unquote Christian country anymore. Religion's done its job. Christian principles have become part of most people's thinking. You might disagree, but I'll break that down for you a bit later. And that could say that Christianity has been a success. It's done what it set out to do. Or we could see it as a failure because other authorities are now doing the job that Christianity used to do. We could see it as losing its authority, it's losing its relevance. So Christianity has not convinced society of its value, and it's now irrelevant except on a personal level. You can make up your mind as we go through which one you think it is. I don't think it's likely you'd get a question asking whether Christianity has succeeded or failed, but it's a good way of framing the idea of whether secularisation is a threat to Christianity, and you could get a question on that. So again, a little bit of history of how the challenge of secularisation to Christianity has played out. So going way back to the 5th to the 10th centuries CE, we call this the Dark Ages because we just don't really know what was going on. We don't have a lot of literature or ideas or new thinking coming out of that time. It doesn't mean that there wasn't any, but it was stifled by strict religious authority. So the church had the power to shut down anything it didn't like, and it did. Aquinas wasn't like that. Aquinas was around in the 1200s. If you've looked at natural moral law, which I know you have, you'll know that Aquinas supported the use of reason alongside faith. He thought you needed both. And this led to more thinking about what should the role of religion in society be. Takes us on to the Protestant Reformation, big challenge to traditional Catholic authority over the interpretation of scripture. We've done about that. Fast forward to the Enlightenment. We've got scientific thinking coming into prominence. We've got Darwin. We've got all sorts of things starting to challenge the dominance of religious thought. We've got it really becoming normalised to think maybe Christianity doesn't have all the answers. And then going into the 19th century and the 20th century, we've got people like Freud and Marx and Ludwig Feuerbach who started to see religion as not a real thing, just as something that serves a function, that does a job. So let's unpack that a little bit more. You're not going to be asked about these guys, they can't appear in questions, but it's useful to just have a little bit of their thinking. So we've got Marx, who had this classic quote, religion is the opiate of the people. Essentially, religion is a drug. It does a job. It keeps the working classes down. It keeps the working classes from fighting their oppressors. He didn't believe in God. He didn't think there was anything objectively real about religion. He didn't think there was any actual truth in it. It was just something that did a job. Freud, similarly, being a psychoanalyst, thought it was all psychological. Religion is something that satisfies a psychological need. He didn't think that was terribly good for you, and he saw some religious beliefs and practices as akin to mental illness. Now, he may not have been right about that, but that's what he thought. Now, Feuerbach is interesting. Feuerbach is in a similar kind of vein to Marx and Freud. He argued that Christianity is a projection, religion is a projection. It's us kind of looking outside of ourselves, looking up and projecting our hopes and aspirations upwards somehow. So Feuerbach is kind of arguing that God didn't create us, it was the other way around, we created God. So what Christians call God is simply a human projection of the best of us, what we really, really want. And following a religion is mainly just a coping strategy. It's an attempt to come to terms with one's sense of self in the world. Now, how this fits into what we're talking about is these ideas were new in the 19th and 20th century. No one had ever really said this stuff before and been taken seriously. Now they were being taken seriously. It was a genuine challenge to the authority of the church. So, does all this make Christianity irrelevant today? Now, I think it's a very good shout to say no, it doesn't, because Christianity and non-religious worldviews very often have a lot in common. So it's very hard to say something stupid or irrelevant or pointless if you actually agree with a lot of what it says. So many non-religious worldviews share exactly the same values as Christianity, so the importance of human life, generally holding it as more important than animal life, although not always, the value of the individual and human rights, the right to life, liberty, property, respect for others and tolerance of different views. Humanism, excuse me, is a commonly held non-religious worldview, but it's got a lot in common with Christianity. So I've got a bit more for you about that here. What does humanism have in common with Christianity? Loads. So if you look at this little graphic that I took from a humanism website, it's not the 10 Commandments, it's the 10 Commitments. So even the imagery, even the kind of setting out of what humanists believe, it's framed in a similar way. And if you pause the video for a second and just have a look at all the 10 things on that diagram, I don't think there's a lot there that a Christian would disagree with. And sorry, again, the census data that we've got doesn't tell a whole story, but it hints that lots of people may be kind of blending their thinking between humanist beliefs and Christian beliefs, even if they don't see it that way. So, for example, lots of people say that they don't belong to a religion, but they're still open to the idea of a god or gods. Some people identify as Christian, but don't go to church. So there's a blend going on. It's not as straightforward as saying Christianity's been replaced. I don't think you can really say that it fully has. What might have happened, though, is that it's gone somewhere else. So we call this the relegation of religion to the private sphere. That's a fancy way of saying religion is just your business. So let's unpack this. There was a time when religion was state-sponsored. So, in other words, everybody had to follow the state religion. A good example of this is when the Emperor Constantine converted the entire Roman Empire to Christianity, all Roman citizens had to become Christians, or there were consequences. And this was the case more or less for a long time. After the Reformation, it slowly became more acceptable to practice religions other than the state religion in private. For it to be okay to do that in public took longer, but we did get there. And then gradually religions became sets of ideas and values that people chose rather than you being told to do it. So this was the beginnings of freedom of religion. And religion today, mostly, certainly in the UK, it's a kind of take it or leave it situation. It's adopted by those who feel that it suits them, their cultural identity, how they see themselves, how they see their place in the world. But you don't have to be religious. There's no public expectation. So therefore you could argue that religion's largely a private matter. That's a big shift. And that's happened because of freedom of religion and because of secularisation. The continuing public role of religion is debated. The number of atheists / agnostics / people who are just not interested in religion is going up. Lots of people say that religion has no role in their lives. There's a flip side to that, though, which is that a lot of people within traditions such as Christianity, they look at the figures of the number of people going to church and they say, well, this doesn't really interest us. Acts of faith such as attending church, taking part of Holy Communion or being baptised, they're surely irrelevant if you don't actually have faith. So going through the motions, doing all the religious stuff means nothing if you don't actually have faith. So private faith is kind of more real, it's more authentic than public expression of it. That's a point worth considering. And lots of cultural traditions have their roots in Christianity, and that shows that while the role of Christianity is changing, it's certainly not being erased. I think it's fair to say Christianity is not going anywhere, at least for a while. And I've got a bunch of examples of that here for you. So Christian values, Christian traditions are very much embedded in British society. So we get Easter and Christmas off. The year is structured around those festivals, not other festivals, not Eid, not Jewish festivals, not Vaisakhi. It's the Christian ones. Sports teams still sing the national anthem, and the national anthem is religious. God save the king. A lot of times people don't think about the words of the national anthem, but it is essentially phrased as a request to God, almost a prayer. And then the picture in the background, you probably saw this, is the Queen's funeral, which had a strongly Christian element to it, as you would expect. The King's coronation will do as well. Remembrance Day, that's not commemorating a religious event, but it's always done in a Christian way. There's always services for it. So Christian values, Christian traditions, deeply embedded in our culture. This is an example of a nice blend between the religious and the secular. So Lichfield Cathedral, Lichfield is where I come from. The cathedral in January 2021, so in one of the lockdowns, became a COVID vaccine hub. So it's a very big building, big open spaces, easy to do social distancing, one-way system. They could get lots of people in and vaccinated and out, and they decided to do that. Not everyone liked that, because they were saying, well, this is a holy building and it's being used for a completely secular purpose. And that didn't sit right with some people. But the Dean of Lichfield went on TV, and you can Google the clip if you like, it's on BBC News. He argued that working to heal and protect people was absolutely in keeping with Christian teachings. And at the same time as coming in to get their vaccination, he was seeing people just stop and take a moment in the cathedral, or light a candle for a loved one who'd been lost, or just sit and have a cry. And the point he was making, this is what I really want you to take from this: spiritual, religious needs and secular needs, they're not necessarily different things. You shouldn't try and necessarily separate them from one another. You can have both at the same time. So that brings us to this question: how much of a threat is secularisation to Christianity? For lots of people, it isn't at all, because this would assume that Christianity doesn't have anything to say about secular matters which affect everybody. So this list here, how to behave, how to live in a community, how to deal with difficult times, technically they're all secular things, but Christianity has a huge amount to say about those things. Lots of people might not identify as Christian, but many people in Britain appreciate the cultural contribution Christianity has made: art, music, architecture. They might even go to church once in a while. Lots of people don't like it when churches are knocked down. Lots of people don't like it when churches are vandalised. So there's something there, there's something meaningful. And it's inevitable that a society with freedom of religion will see religion play less of a role than it did in the past, because once you become free to reject it, some people will reject it. But many Christians see that as absolutely fine and totally the way it should be. Now, the next bit, and we're just going to touch on this briefly in this video, is the rise of militant atheism. So this is kind of secularization on steroids, the view that religion is not only irrelevant, but it's irrational and bad. And this really starts with a book called Honest to God by Bishop John Robinson. Now, the fact that he's a bishop will tell you that he had a faith. And he's writing this book for a secular society. And he argues that the conventional image of God, so the man in the sky on the cloud sending down lightning bolts and telling people they must obey him, he thought we had to stop thinking of God like that, because it was so at odds with scientific and rational views of reality. So Robinson wasn't daft. He accepted the findings of science and he thought, right, we need to reframe God. We need to stop thinking of God in a way that's incompatible with scientific thinking. And he got two main reactions to this book. This book went very, very big at the time. Lots and lots of academics, Christian thinkers, theologians were like, yeah, we agree with you. That's never what we thought God was. We never thought that this caricature of God had really been taken seriously. But others possibly misunderstood Robinson a little bit and thought that the book was an attack on the entire concept of God and therefore an attack on Christianity. And in the background, there was quite a lot going on. So liberation theology, which will come up in the second half of the topic, was becoming a lot more popular. The Church of England was starting to look inward and getting really quite obsessed with matters about gender, sexuality, the right forms of worship, how it should structure itself. And quite a few people were getting quite impatient with that because they thought the church was, doing too much admin, not enough actual ministry to people. 60s and 70s gave us New Age spirituality, an alternative to organised religion, a way to explore the spiritual side of life, but without a lot of the traditional rules. So this led to a lot more, particularly sexual freedoms, which people hadn't had before, and that was quite appealing to people. And scandals as well. So financial scandals, child abuse scandals in various churches, and not just churches, other faiths as well. It shook people's confidence. They thought, well, we can't trust the church. Why should we do what the church says when they haven't got their act together? And so out of all of this comes militant atheism. So militant atheism is the view that holding religious beliefs that are based solely on faith and not on reason is willfully ignorant and harmful. So believing something with no proof, militant atheists find that completely unacceptable. It's willfully ignorant in their view. You're being deliberately stupid. Militant atheists are openly hostile to religion, so they see it as bad. They would like to rid the world of religion. And they tend to see people who hold what they consider to be irrational beliefs as either mad, gullible, or stupid. So quite spicy attitudes coming out of militant atheism. I'm going to stop there, but before you watch my next video on secularisation, I really, really, really recommend that you have a little look at another video on YouTube. It's actually a podcast that was filmed, and it's Krishna Guru Murthy's podcast. He's talking to Richard Dawkins. Dawkins is a big part of the next section of the topic. Dawkins, if you haven't come across him before, is a militant atheist, and having a little look at this podcast will be a really great way to introduce you to some of Dawkins's main ideas and how he makes his arguments. Okay, thanks so much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you next time.